Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Wild Interviews with Fabricio Lazarde. Today, we have another special guest with us. It is Karen Strier, directly from Chicago. Welcome, Karen. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I'm actually in Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, in Madison. Yeah, you work at the Wisconsin-Madison University, right?
The University of Wisconsin in Madison, that's right. But we are in the Chicago's time zone, so that's
Oh, in the
easy to
Central
confuse.
Eastern, in the Central Time. Sorry, yes.
Yes.
Well, sorry for that little thing, but going a little back to Karen. Karen is a woman very special for many Brazilians, especially those who are working to conserve the Atlantic forest. You may ask yourselves, why? What does she do or what is she doing right now? Well, Karen is the one that have made the Muriquis project possible. And most of the research we know up to date is thanks to Karen. So today we will be talking about the Northern Muriquis. Karen, are you excited for today's interview?
Of course I am. It's always fun to talk about the Muriquis.
Yeah, I'm also very happy to talk about them, especially because they are a spider monkey, but they're such a different spider monkey species. You know, starting with the color. For me, they look kind of more similar to langurs than to spider monkeys. Just just because of the color, but yes, I'm excited too.
Good.
So well, I think the best way to start would be with an introduction of yourself. What can you tell us about you? How did you study on conservation?
Well, I guess you could say that I was interested in a combination of science and being outdoors, and I love animals. So I was really lucky to find my way first into animal behavior and then into field studies with baboons in Africa, which was a position I had as an undergraduate field assistant on the Amboseli Baboon Project run by Gene Altman and Stuart Altman at the time and Glenn Hausfeder. It's run by Gene Altman and Susan Alberts and former addition of some other people as well, Beth Archer and Jenny Tong. But now, when I was there in 1979, I was an undergraduate. I spent 6 months in Africa, and it was a time when I realized that I wanted to spend my life outside studying wild animals for science. And I went to graduate school. And when I was looking for something to do my PhD research on at that time, I was interested in testing models of the ecological determinants of social behavior in wild primates. And my PhD advisor suggested I look at this particular monkey that he had just finished narrating a film about. The film was made by Russ Mittermeier, who at the time was a vice president of the World Wildlife Fund, and produced by Russ. And it was about the Muriquis. And I watched this movie. It was just coming out. It was being in the process of being made. And I thought these were beautiful animals. And there was something really exciting about studying a species that we knew very little about. We knew it was endangered, but we knew very little about its behavior in the wild. And the Muriquis had some interesting anatomical characteristics that made them scientifically interesting to me and really interesting to look at with these models. So I contacted Russ Mittermeier, and he let me join him and some other people on a trip to southeastern Brazil.
Wow.
And we went to Caratinga, which was a forest, actually a privately owned forest owned by a landowner who had a coffee plantation and pasture, but he had saved this little pocket of forest, and he prohibited hunting by anyone in the forest. And so little did he know that he was protecting what was one of the world's most endangered primates and what became one of the most important populations of the northern Muriquis. So I fell in love with these animals. I was super excited I love Brazil. I love the people were so nice to me. I love being in the forest. And I love the idea that everything I could learn about these animals would teach us more about science and more about be able to use that information for conservation to help save them.
Amazing, simply amazing. And I have three things to say. One of them, I will wait till the fun facts area, but I wanted to say that, you know, mm, I think his name was Feliciano
Mm-hmm.
Abdallah. Yes. Well, he did not only protect the species, but maybe even saved them. Because imagine if he would have opened or cut down the trees, destroyed that forest, what would be of that population of northern Muriquis right now? Would you imagine?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I like to think about Senor Feliciano. He's a good example really to all of us, especially to young people who are trying to figure out what to do with their lives, how one person can make such a huge impact, can make such a difference on the world. And in his case, it wasn't even by going out and doing anything new. It was by protecting and preserving and living a conservative lifestyle that really made the difference.
And that's a thing that I would like to remark, that people can protect wildlife and can do their part for the environment. You don't need to be a conservationist to protect the environment or help wildlife. And this is a very good example of what Mr. Feliciano did, that all of us could do too.
Exactly.
Mm, the second point was that, for my viewers, did you know that I created, along with a friend, International Baboon Day? Last year was our first ever celebration. It is on December the 3rd. And and what a coincidence that your first work on conservation was with baboons. It makes me really happy to know. But well, if you want to check out some of my interviews on baboons, you can go up and see an interview with Robert Seifert from Philadelphia, I think, yes. And he has also worked many years in Africa studying vocalizations and social behavior on them. But well, let's keep going through Muriquis. After you started working with the Muriquis, what did you find in Brazil? I mean, when you started on there, what was the situation with the monkey? Did people knew about it, or was his habitat very fragmented, or the species had a lot of threats? What was your experience?
When I started studying Muriquis, I knew that they were very endangered, and that knowledge came first from a Brazilian scientist who had, in the late 1960s, early in 1971, he published a monograph about the Muriquis, and he had visited all of the areas in southeastern Brazil that were known to still have forests or have had forests, and asked the people about the presence or the recent presence or the historical presence of the Muriquis. And it was that book that, published in Portuguese by the Brazilian Academy of Science, that got Brazilian scientists to start to pay attention and conservationists to the importance of Muriquis and what was happening in this region of Brazil. It's the southeastern Atlantic forest of Brazil, which is considered one of the biodiversity hotspots in the world, one of the most biodiversity hotspots. Many species of plants and animals that are found only in this part of the world. And the Muriquis were known to be one of those species. So at the time, in fact, it was Brazilian scientists who took Russell Mittermeier to see the Muriquis, and then it was Russ who introduced me to them. And when I got there, though, there were, the local people, the Brazilians. It was a farming community, and everybody, of course, knew there were primates, monkeys in the forest, not just Muriquis, but howler monkeys and capuchin monkeys and marmosets. But nobody had conducted yet a systematic study of them. There were some Brazilian biologists from a university in Belo Horizonte, and they had been coming out to look at the birds, and they were starting to look at the monkeys, and they were people who helped me get started. So here I was coming out now to spend 14 months to do my PhD research, and they helped me a lot in the forest. But I was the first person to live there and really get the monkeys to habituate, to let me follow them all day without being afraid of me, to count the number of animals, to learn what they did in this particular forest. And it was like so exciting because all these things that, first of all, it's just an amazing experience to spend your day in the company of a group of wild animals that weren't necessarily already familiar with having people with them all the time. These Muriquis had never had somebody spend all day, every day with them. And so I was as new to them as they were to me. But slowly, as they began to accept me, I could begin to observe their behavior and recognize them as individuals. And I was applying a lot of the methods that I had learned on the much more established project with baboons to a new species, a new study site. And it was, that was great training. And it's also a good example for people who are just starting out that each experience, you can use each experience to build, to add to the next one. And so you bring the parts of it that you learn from and you like, and you change the things that no longer apply or that aren't relevant. But the Muriquis turned out to be really different from baboons, and in fact from any other primate, most notably because they live in peaceful, egalitarian societies. So when you think about baboons, very social animals, and they're full of affiliative behaviors and groom each other and spend time in close proximity. But they also have very strict dominance hierarchies, and males are twice as big as females, and they have enormous canines, and they can inflict a lot of damage on one another. And they use the threat of physical aggression as part of their social repertoire. Muriquis, males and females are the same size. They have relatively small, they have the same size canines, and there's no hierarchy, no agonistic, no aggressive based kind of pecking order. So they avoid one another, and they very rarely fight. There's no one individual who's the alpha male or even the alpha female. And in fact, the relationships between males and females are completely egalitarian. And so it's a very different kind of lifestyle, much more peaceful, much more relaxed. They interact with one another. They spend a lot of time together, and they hug each other. They don't groom, but they hug each other.
Wow.
And when they're stressed or tense, they avoid one another. And so they have a much looser social, I won't say social organization, but they spend less time in really cohesive groups. They spread out a lot more. And they keep track of each other in the trees with vocalizations. But it was the discovery of them being such peaceful primates that was so exciting and so unexpected, and really just kind of made me then start looking at other primates through a different perspective. If you come to a field with your preconceptions about something, and then you see them in another way, you begin to see that there's a lot more variation than we used to think. So that was a big discovery about the Muriquis in terms of just their general behavior and how they compared to other primates. And it also made it so excruciatingly painful to think that these amazing animals were on the verge of extinction, that they could go extinct before we even knew enough about them to really understand them. And so there was a big commitment. You know, I began, I think during that first year, as I was learning about them, became more and more committed to wanting to devote my efforts not only to learning about them, but to applying that knowledge to help in their conservation.
You,
And
you are completely right. You know, I believe that we learn a lot. For example, for many conservationists that have worked with other species prior to working with them, like how can I say, the species they are passionate about or the species they choose at the end, well, people keep learning all the way. In each one of the species they worked with, they learned something. And when they gathered all that learning, they apply it with the species, for example, lesser known species like the Muriquis.
mhm.
So I believe that we can do good things for these animals and we can try to do our best for them. Well, you know, the Brazilian Atlantic forest is a region that currently it's being very threatened by several threats, including urbanization, habitat loss. Well, mostly the same threats that affect all over the world. But what's
Mhm.
the thing with here? There are many endemic species. For example, there is the Muriqui, the Jacutinga. There are even a lot of bird species that many people don't know about that have already gone extinct in the wild or completely extinct, like the Alagoas curassow. But well, Karen, I wanted to talk about also the egalitarian part. You mentioned that they are egalitarian. For those of you who don't know what's the meaning of egalitarian, it is like equalitarian. They all of them are equal. They don't, as mentioned by Karen, they don't have alphas. They don't have, like a very important social hierarchy or social structure. But a difference with other New World monkeys, Muriquis don't live on groups, or they just come together to breed or for protection.
Oh no, they very much live in groups. They have long-term social relationships. I've with one another and they live into their 40s. So they're very much live in groups. The difference is that they don't always see each other every day.
Oh,
So a group of yellow baboons sleeps together in the same group of trees, and they climb down out of the trees in the morning, and they spend the day together, and they may spend more time with their friends in the group and more distant. The Muriquis also travel together. They can be all in the same area, moving in the same parts of the forest, but sometimes they fission, the groups split up, and so little subgroups will go off and they're more spread out, and then they reunite when there's a lot of food or there's some other resource that draws them together. But they're definitely they behave differently towards members of their own group than towards other groups. And they also live in societies where the males grow up and stay in the group they're born in, and the females, when they reach adolescence, which for Muriquis is about 6 years of age, is when they disperse. They leave their mothers and their other relatives behind, the groups they were born in, and they go join another group. And this discovery was one of the most important ones for two reasons. First, because at the time I started studying the Muriquis, our views of primates in general were very much based on old world monkeys like baboons and macaques and chimpanzees, old world apes. we didn't know as much about the New World primates. And so our views were, and we didn't know as much about a lot of arboreal primates. And so our views were very much about, very much in that model, and that baboons and macaques live in these long female bonded societies, and females stay in their birth groups with their mothers and their grandmothers and their aunts and their great grandmothers, these big female kinship groups, and it's the males that move around. And people just assumed that was the common pattern for primates. And the Muriquis, and that chimpanzees were different because they do it differently. But of course, chimpanzees are different because they're more like humans and they're closely related to us. Which is a very anthropocentric perspective on primates. Well, Muriquis turned out to be different, more like chimpanzees in that regard, where the males stay in their natal groups and the females disperse. And so this changes their whole social dynamics. And that helped me look at other primates. And actually, when you look at other primates, we actually see that the only primates where that pattern of living in female bonded groups with your lifelong kin, where it's really consistent across species, is in the group of old world monkeys that includes baboons and macaques, the old world monkeys called the Cercopithecines. And that there's a lot more variation in the other old world monkeys like langurs, the colubrines, as well as in the apes. None of them live in groups like that, and New World monkeys and lemurs. So there's a lot more variation. So that was scientifically really interesting. And the conservation side of it, applications were also really interesting, because let's think about this together. You have a very small population of monkeys and there's no other Muriquis nearby. So if you want to increase that population, you want to manage it, help that population survive in another place, you'd want to bring more animals to it. Exactly. Well, we now know that if we brought males into these populations, that would be really stressful, because the males only associate with their close male relatives for life. So you'd be breaking up, taking males away from their lifelong families, and you'd be putting them in a situation where none of the new Muriquis would want to interact with them. By contrast, we know that females leave their natal groups and they look for another group. And if, as is true in Caratinga, there are multiple groups, so they can join another group without leaving the forest, that's what they do. And so they join another group, they have unrelated males they can mate with, they make new friends, and they start their own reproductive lives in these other groups. But if they live in a really tiny forest and there's no other group, then those females have two options. They can stay in the group they were born in, where the only males are their fathers and their brothers, and that's not good for them to mate with. It causes close inbreeding. Or what we're discovering they will do is they are so motivated to leave, to look for another group, that they actually will leave the forest, and sometimes they have to cross the ground where they could be attacked by predators or dogs. And they're looking for more forest with other groups to join. Wow. Sometimes they never find these. And so knowing this about Muriquis, we've learned that if we want to manage them, the best way to do that is by translocating females. And we know the best age to do it with. And in fact, there have been my colleagues, Brazilian colleagues, have led a number of these successful translocation projects that involved localizing females in other populations where the females had nowhere to go and were leaving the forest looking for new groups to join with no future. And by capturing them and putting them in a population where they could find another group, they end up succeeding, and they have a social and reproductive lives, and they help by bringing new genes into that new population. So just learning something so basic, like who usually leaves their natal groups, and what age do they usually do it, gave us a key to the management of this endangered species to help save populations that would go extinct without our help. And I'm really proud to collaborate with a lot of Brazilian scientists who are doing this work in actual management. It's really exciting.
My mind is simply blowing right now. Really, there's so much information that the only thing I can say is that this species is unique, and that if we don't conserve it, we we may have lost uh, an evolutionary important species, because everything when I mean that this species is unique, because for example, one of the only new world species, if not the only, I'm not sure, egalitarian new
Mhm.
world monkey species. Second, they are the biggest of all new world monkeys. That's and in everything you have found over the years, all that you've mentioned. mm, I wanted to ask you a bit more about the translocations. Females are the ones that live, not males, like it happens in other species. So,
Right.
when you have translocated them, what has been the challenges you have found, or how how can I say it? For example, let's say that you translocate a group of females to another portion of the forest where there are females needing a group. Like the example you made. But in that forest, are there males or are there other groups? Or
So, yeah. So, well, first of all, I want to just be really clear and give credit to the people who have done the translocation. So I don't personally do that part of the work. I collaborate with people who do. And the people who are most active in this is a Brazilian scientist named Fabiano Gemello, who would be a great person for you to interview, because he's also using exciting drone technology to explore forests that have Muriquis and other primates that no one has been able to see because they're so dense and difficult to walk through. So, but we use for the translocations have been, people have report to us where they find cases of individual animals, females. Some farmers will say, oh, there's a female Muriqui, and they'll get in touch with one of us. Sometimes they write to me and I put them in touch with Fabiano and his team and my other Brazilian colleagues, Sergio Mendes and well, Fernanda Tabacal. When the Muriquis get to when they go then and find these females isolated, they go with a big team of veterinarians and experts who know how to anesthetize wild animals and how to handle them with great care, because we don't want to hurt them. And then they always bring them to a place that they've already arranged. So in two cases, there were small populations, groups of males and females, one group of a male and female living in a little isolated forest with no access to any other Muriquis. And by introducing a female who was coming from a different forest like that, a different group, by bringing her in, they were able to help increase the number of, bring new genes into the population, and she integrated very quickly, and they followed her, and they're still following her today. And that's happened in a couple of other places as well. The most exciting project in some ways, that's one really exciting project, and I've been involved in the, because I collaborate with these people, are my friends, some of them are my former students, and but they're really the ones who have taken all the initiative and do the risks. Though the risks are really the danger of catching the animals. You have to make sure the local people understand that it's not hunting. It's not the same as hunting. It's that these animals are being cared for and they're being given a chance at a new life instead of being stuck living alone in an isolated forest all by themselves, which is where some of these females end up. So another project that's really exciting is one that was started for northern Muriquis in a place called Ibichipaka. Again, I was involved as a consultant or conversation, but the people running this project are Fabiano and Fernanda. And this is a place where the population, there was a small population of Muriquis, a group that lived, males and females. And over time, the group got smaller and smaller and smaller. And it ended up only having, when I first saw the group myself, there were only 4 males left. Now, a group with only 4 males and no females has no future. The animals can live for a while, but they can't reproduce. So the owner of this forest made a huge commitment to wanting to invest in trying to save this population. And the only way that could be done was to bring some of these females that were living alone, bring them in and introduce them to the males. So the first female they brought and introduced, she did really well, but she didn't want to spend any time with the males. So the second female they brought, they changed the procedure, and in this case, they basically they captured the males as well, and they put them in a large outdoor enclosure, and then they introduced the female, and very slowly, and the animals could avoid each other or they could interact, and they very quickly began interacting, and then they brought another female, and now they have a third female. And one of the first females reproduced and has a baby from these males. So they have actually succeeded in perpetuating, in giving these last males of this one little population a chance to reproduce, and the males are still alive and they still may have other chances. And so now there's a new group, and it works because the males were already familiar, knew each other. And now they're bringing females in, and females in nature move around anyway. So the females know how to interact. And it's just so exciting to see this happen.
Karen, that's an interesting topic to talk about. There are many populations of fragmented populations of a species that, for example, if people see that there are only a male left, or there are only, in like this case, 4 males and no females, we don't have the resources or the way of getting more individuals to that population, so we will simply leave it like that until they die off or something. But I believe that we always need to have like a backup population or an insurance population. For example, maybe yes, they are only like 10 individuals or less in, what was the name? Sorry,
Ibichipaka, the place where they're bringing the females in. Ibichipaka.
Ibichipaka. Thanks a lot. Well, there may be less than 10 or 10 individuals in Ibichipaka, but what about if something happens at Caratinga or with another population? You always have a little thing there. But yes, Karen, this interview's been great. We have talked about so many topics. I think that the time was very short for such an important interview. So let's do something. First of all, I will give the opportunity to you to say your final message, your final inspiring message. But I wanted to ask you something. First the message, and then I'll ask you.
Well, my final message, I guess we've talked about a lot of these points. I could talk all day about Muriquis. They are really amazing, exciting animals. We know that there are about 10 or 12 populations remaining, and probably about 1,000 individuals left in the world for northern Muriquis, and divided in these populations. The Caratinga population, which has been studied for almost 40 years on my project, has helped train more than 75 Brazilian students. And many of those students, former students of mine, are now working with Muriquis or other primates or with conservation. And I'm an American citizen, but I've worked for more than half of my life in Brazil with Muriquis and with Brazilian collaborators. And I guess I feel like I would just encourage anybody who's interested in conservation of any species to look around and see what you can do and how you can get involved, because the world needs more people who really care about protecting and saving wildlife and their habitats.
Great message, Karen. Prior to the ending, I would like to thank the people you mentioned, to thank Fernando, to thank Fabiano. I actually read some of the work Fabiano does with
Mm-hmm.
other species and with the Muriqui. It's great. I would love to contact him someday. It would be great. And yes, Karen, what I was going to ask you was, would you be willing to have like a second episode? Because I feel that the Muriqui, it's such an amazing species that we left a lot to talk about. And also because we focused on the northern Muriqui. But what about the southern Muriqui? And if you want, if you don't, it's completely fine. We can just leave it at one episode. It's up to you.
Oh, I would be happy to. I would be happy to meet with you again and talk more about the Muriquis. And they used to be one species, so it was only about 20 years ago that the conservation and taxonomy groups decided that they merited being split into two species. So I have worked with, also studied southern Muriquis for a little bit, and there are also a lot of people working with them as well. So we can, I'd be happy to talk about them or the northern Muriqui or anything. Just let me know when. Happy to
Great.
join.
I'll let you know, Karen. Well, people, I hope you liked today's interview. It's been really great having Karen with us and learning not only about the Muriqui, but also going deeper and learning about what conservation really means and what we can do to help protect all the species that need us and our world in general. So, Karen, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. It's been awesome to have you, and I hope we
Thank you.
can have another interview, another episode, and talk more about the Muriquis.
Of course, I'd be happy to. It would be my pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing with this program. I think it's terrific.
Oh, thanks to you too. Thanks to you too, Karen. Well, I will leave you the link to Caratinga project down below, the link to their social media. I think I follow them, yes. Also, I leave you the link to my social media where we post exclusive content. So if you want to check it out, I recommend you and following me. Also, remember to subscribe. We need more subscribers. We need to reach to more people. Keep sharing, keep liking, comment down below if you want me to do an interview on a specific species. I would be more than happy to. Well, bye everybody. See you. Hope you like it.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.